Hurricane Ida was a deadly and extremely destructive Category 4 hurricane that developed 2 years ago, causing massive power outages and widespread damage in Louisiana. The hurricane proved to be the 6th costliest tropical cyclone on record and the 4th costliest Atlantic hurricane in the U.S. We're going to visit with an electric co-op whose communities were located in the direct path of that storm. Hello, I'm Terry Vishwanath, the energy economist at CoBank and your co-host of Power Plays. For this month's podcast, my colleague and co-host, Tamara Reynolds, and I wanted to explore how electric cooperatives prepare for natural disasters.
Hey, Terry. In advance of major storms and natural disasters that strike without notice, electric co-op teams work together to identify system vulnerabilities and to identify potential resources, lining up personnel, equipment, and supplies that may be needed to restore power to the communities.
But what exactly does advanced planning look like for natural disasters? And how do our co-ops recover from these unexpected, devastating events? We caught up with 2 amazing co-ops, one in Colorado, the state that is home to us, but also elevated wildfire risk, and another co-op down on the Gulf in Louisiana to hear their stories of preparation and recovery. Our first conversation you'll hear is with Mark Phillips. He's the Chief Engineering and Operations Officer at DEMCO, Dixie Electric Membership Corporation.
DEMCO was formed in 1938 and has grown their membership to about 116,000 meters today. Their service territory stretches across 7 parishes northwest of New Orleans. The co-op manages roughly 9,000 miles of line with only about 2,500 miles underground, and that equates to roughly 12 meters per mile. Listen to Mark's comments about DEMCO's stewardship of this Louisiana electric distribution system and how this co-op team responded to their worst storm in nearly a century.
Back in 2021, Hurricane Ida completely devastated our service territory. You have all the models that predict a lot of things that a storm could possibly do or grow into, and they do a very good job of predicting that. But there's still that level of uncertainty of whether or not it's actually going to accelerate when it gets in there. Is it going to get to us faster than we assumed? Is it going to be stronger than we originally assumed? With Ida, that was just the case. As it got in, it got stronger as it got to the coast, and it lasted so long. Like usually when it hits the coast, you start to see a decline in the magnitude of the size of the storm. Well, Ida, this wasn't the case. The worst hurricane by far that we have experienced in our 85-year history. Even though it was as bad as it was, we were able to survive and come out better than when we went in before because of the experience we gained through that storm.
You play a pretty big role when it comes to natural disasters and sort of leading the team. Can you talk a little bit about what that role looks like and how you help the rest of your peers at DEMCO get ready for storms?
Ultimately, I'm responsible for a large portion of the organization. I manage the inside line personnel. That's all the DEMCO linemen, right? And that's about 100 to 120 of us when you count all the management employees. Of course, I have a lot of input from the others in the organization, finance, fleet, and facilities. They help develop the plan. When it comes to engaging that plan, we take a lot of things into account. Number one, of course, the size of the storm. Lesson that we learned from Hurricane Ida was that, we need to have a tiered approach to restoration, right? And when I say tiered approach, depending on the intensity of the storm, we take a different approach to each storm, whether it's I'm just going to secure a block of hotel rooms because I'm only thinking I'm going to get 100 guys in here to help, or 100, 200 guys, or do I need to take it a step further because we're going to see a bigger storm and I need, 500 guys? Or is it to the magnitude of Hurricane Ida where we got 1,000 folks in here and I need to set up a tent city, or I need to set up some sort of relief that I can kind of make a one-stop shop for, where I can feed them, house them, shower them, do their laundry, give them all the essentials that they need for the day-to-day all out of one place. So lessons learned over the years have forced us to redevelop our emergency response plan to support just that. And then when you look at the efforts of the employees of DEMCO, we engage an all hands on deck approach. We use every person that is an employee of DEMCO, and we actually inject them into the process some way, somehow, because all those support services are probably more important than the restoration, because I've got to be concerned as well with whether or not, if it's a long-winded storm, are those crews that have come in to visit, are they going to stay or make another rotation?
So let's kind of talk a little bit about what a full court press looks like at DEMCO based on that Hurricane Ida experience.
Right. We're trying to get ahead of it, and we're making an assumption for how many people do we need. We have a statewide association here in Louisiana, a Association of Louisiana Electric Cooperatives, that work with us hand in hand in these types of events, because if I say that, they call and say, hey, we see the storm's coming, how many people do you think you need? I may say, well, I need 500 people. Well, then they start polling the associations across the South, or anybody that's willing to listen, and say, hey, if this storm hits us and you're not going to be impacted, can you get these resources to us?
Hurricane Ida, how long did you have crews in?
Yeah, so that was a 21-day event for us. We do everything we can to protect our employees and their safety. So our employees were working 16-hour days. That's from wake up to lay down. We had different things happening throughout the day. We had skeleton crews on through the middle of the night, to go put eyes and ears on things that were hazards. We kept a 24-hour rotation of employees, maybe not to the scale of we're working 750 guys in the middle of the day, but maybe just 25 guys. And they would overlap taking care of issues and concerns that were popping up throughout the night.
So if I'm an electric co-op that's sitting in the Midwest, and I'm not familiar with hurricane damage and restoration, let's have a conversation about restoration. So if I just transferred in a member of your team, Mark, what kind of mess can I expect that has to be fixed to get people up and the lights on?
The first thing is we're very heavily vegetated here in Louisiana on our system. We deal a lot with the vegetation, right? And then because underneath that vegetation is all the poles and all the damage that is incurred. So I've got to cut those trees out of the way and give those crews a clear path towards restoring power, right? Because you can't drive trucks over the trees. So I'm not talking about a small tree. I'm talking about large, massive oak trees that take humongous chainsaws to cut through. And then the second thing would be the sheer topography of what we deal with, right? Our northernmost part of our service territory is clay and hills, and not mountains, but just hills, right? And then you go to the furthest reach of our southern territory and it's swamp, right? You can't get a truck off the pavement because you'll bury it. So a lot of work has to be done manually. So it's just a sheer difference in the change. It's like a seasonal change from top to bottom. And then the wildlife that we have to deal with here. In hurricane season, it's not the snakes and it's not the alligators that everybody thinks we deal with on a day-to-day basis. It's the bugs, it's the mosquitoes, right? It's so hot. The humidity is overwhelming as well at times. But to come down and then work in that environment is something you're not used to. We have to take that in consideration when we're pushing those crews to make sure that they have the resources they need to stay cool, to stay hydrated, to stay well fed, right? So that they don't crash and burn while working for us.
So there's a lot of logistical markers for what's required in what a full court press might look like, including the aftermath of the storm that will come through after the eye of the storm has passed. There's still a lot of weather that can be as destructive.
Power was your number one necessity at the time before the storm, whether or not you had electricity or not. And then post-storm, it's who's got fuel. Because, if I can't put diesel in a truck, that truck can't go out to restore power. So you have to have fuel to be able to start the restoration process. We had, fuel cubes on the ground on day 2 of the storm. And a fuel cube is the size of like a tanker truck. To say your local football stadium here close to headquarters, where we would use as a parking lot, in the middle of the night, they'd go fill those trucks up.
So Mark, one of the things that was eye-opening for me to learn and talk about with customers during Winter Storm Uri was the early detection component and how much insight they had before that storm actually made impact and sort of shut down the greater part of ERCOT. What kind of tools do you use?
Early detection, early prediction. Really, your first line of defense is your local weather service. But then again, too, that that's not enough. Prior to Hurricane Ida, I was in the process of evaluating one of those softwares, a software company called Storm Geo. All throughout the Hurricane Ida, I was getting, hour to hour, minute to minute updates from this software system. There's two types of winds that we deal with hurricanes. You have upper atmospheric winds, right, where the winds are up high, where it doesn't impact the ground, or you have surface level winds. Well, the surface level winds are the ones that are doing the damage. I'm getting true information from a software system and a group of meteorologists that are taking the scare tactics out of it. I saw the value there. And not only does it bring value to those types of weather events, but it also brings day-to-day value, right? We still deal with thunderstorms in the afternoons. You mentioned Hurricane Uri. Well, we were impacted by Hurricane Uri. That was a 7-day event for us. We live in an area where that's very uncommon. Right? We need the prediction for those also.
We've covered a lot of territory, but I want to make sure we haven't missed something, Mark. Is there anything top of mind that we haven't touched on?
I think the biggest thing is have a plan in place, and evaluate that plan on a yearly basis. Don't take anything you're doing for granted. Right? Create a network with other cooperatives, whether it be in your state or across the country. We had over 5,000 broke poles during Hurricane Ida. And to restore 5,000, it takes longer than 21 days to build 5,000 poles. How did you get them up so fast? Make sure that everybody in the co-op has some level of responsibility at that time, and that everybody is doing what they need to do to ultimately to support the restoration of power. So have that plan in place. You can't do anything without a plan, especially tackle something like that. Those are some long days, and I won't say if there's some tears were shed, and you never thought you were going to see the end of the tunnel, light at the end of the tunnel, but no, it's what we do. It's what we do as cooperative employees. Our linemen. I was a lineman. This is what we're built for. This is what we're made to do.
More than 1 million people lost power in Louisiana because of Hurricane Ida. This Category 4 hurricane proved to be one of the most devastating storms in U.S. history, downing more power poles in Louisiana than Hurricanes Katrina and Rita combined. So when Mark volunteered to speak with us about DEMCO's system recovery effort with that storm, we knew that we wanted to hear that story.
DEMCO's communities were in crisis, and these teams, with the help of other co-ops, rose to the challenge.
Our next interview with Pam Feuerstein, the Chief Operating Officer with Core Electric, and the largest co-op in the state of Colorado, speaks to gaining valuable situational awareness of natural disasters.
Core Electric's 5,000 square miles of territory is centered between Denver and Colorado Springs here in Colorado. The deadly Hayman fire that occurred back in 2002 was within their service territory, and at the time was the largest wildfire in the state's recorded history. Our conversation with Pam really focuses on preparation and planning that can mitigate the risks of another Hayman fire occurring. Listen to what she has to say.
Our wildfire program is made up of several areas, and a big area is our operational practices and our situational awareness. And that's where we do the risk assessment of our entire system, using available data through Colorado Wildfire Risk Assessment Report, through Colorado State Forest Service. And this is data that we bring into our GIS system. And then we, take all these different data sets, and they're comprised of, population, access issues, the amount of, dead fuels or potential for dead fuels in an area. And it creates this risk profile essentially of our system. So now we can look at where our facilities are, and what we do is rank them on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being no real risk. So now when we're looking at the programs that we're developing, whether it's maintenance, construction programs, looking at, overhead lines that are potential for underground, we look at that risk profile.
Let's talk a little bit about the drone technology in terms of risk assessment.
We do a full, visual patrol of our lines on some pretty strict schedules, and those schedules are based on if you're in high fire risk areas versus low fire risk. Obviously, we look at lines more frequently in the higher risk areas, but that's all from a looking up type of view. Bringing the drones in, we are now getting a top down view, which can identify a lot of other issues from the top down. Plus, we use some infrared technology with those drones, so it can determine if some of our connection points our hot spots, right? Maybe the connection isn't quite what it should be. So we can, identify those. They send us some high quality pictures. We import all that data into our GIS system, and they identify those as, high risk to low risk, same sort of thing from a priority level. And we put that information into our GIS, prioritize it, and then now our linemen have access to all these dashboards, and they know where they need to go, immediately to make repairs. And then, we schedule the rest down based on severity.
Wildfires sparked by electrical components are a rising problem. The deadliest wildfire in California's history, the Camp Fire, was caused by faulty transmission lines. Pam, how does CORE consider electric placement or replacement in light of wildfire risk?
Again, we prioritize things based on the risk level within our system, which a big portion of our system is at pretty high risk. But things like fuses, the normal fuse that, we've used for 40 years are expulsion type fuses. So when there's a fault, they blow up essentially, right? Sparks could cause a fire, just your normal fuse. So there's non-expulsion fuses. We're implementing those in high-risk areas. Our reclosing devices were typically oil devices. We've gone through and replaced all those oil devices with non-oil type switches, air switches that can be used instead. Again, another mitigating factor. Our construction, the way we do construction is looked at. Longer cross arms, a lot of rubber goods, meaning a lot of cover up on jumpers so that, an animal, squirrel, bird can't make, connection, or if they do make connection, it's covered, insulated, not to cause a spark or an issue.
We briefly touched on the use of drones for aerial imaging and, of course, ground crew inspections, but what other resources are you applying to gain greater situational awareness or early detection insights?
So we have several different things that we're doing in that area, from cameras that we have access to and just can, if we get word from social media through the news that there may be a fire in our service territory, we maybe can point one of those cameras in the area to try and get a better idea of what that fire looks like. We subscribe to a service called FireGuard that has some parameters set that if that service detects a fire within our service territory or some defined miles outside of our service territory, that we ask them to provide us, an email notification that there might be something for us to look at. And then even more recently, we've started a pilot project with some artificial intelligent cameras that are continuously doing a 360 scan within our service territory, and they detect smoke plumes and then automatically notify us, which is very interesting and fantastic technology. So, if it detects a smoke plume, we get a notification in the first, 0 to 5 minutes that there is a fire in, a smoke plume at least detected in our service territory. So we can more quickly react to that to, look at the area and determine, is this a place where we have facilities, do not have facilities? That information can also be shared with, local emergency responders. So from a situational awareness perspective, we're getting better at being notified in a very quick manner that there is even an event in our service territory. And then that way we can communicate very quickly internally, hey, there's something going on. Nothing to worry about from our perspective as running the utility at this time. This is the location, people are responding to it, to, hey, we do have facilities that are relatively close or in this potential area. We may want to send some crews to, find out what the situation is and see if our services are needed.
And that's really interesting because I do think when we think about the first responders and maybe the traditional case is it would be very passive. We would wait for someone to let us know that there's a problem and then we respond. So how do we get that high priority message out to the membership?
We kind of treat it the same, when we have large weather events from an outage perspective, even with wildfire right now, that, it's a big blast on all our social media platforms, on our website. We may be in contact with specific news agencies to let them know what's going on and what we're doing. We have a full fully staffed communications department that we internally, they get the information needed from, the subject matter experts involved, and then they are able to communicate with all various forms of media to our members. We have also really good relationships with the cities and towns that we serve and the local governments, and have relationships there, so we can also reach out and keep those people informed.
We are seeing some federal funding to begin to add additional layers of protection. So there's $38 million in funding that was announced for Colorado to expand wildfire barriers and protect communities and firefighters. But how does that actually work? That was made available through recent congressional funding. How does that work for Colorado?
Unfortunately, that particular funding was allotted for national forests that aren't in our service territory. But what we're hoping for is there'll be some additional funding. The major forests that we serve or have our facilities in is the Pike San Isabel. And this one, I think these forests were more on the western slope here in Colorado for this first tranche of funding. Hopefully there'll be more. But speaking of grant and funding that is available, there's been a lot of DOE funding that we have grant applications in for that is for some of the technologies and systems that we're implementing and hoping to deploy and trying to get some grant funding so we can further be progressive in our wildfire mitigation program.
That's really helpful. Is there any question that I've missed?
A couple of things that are worth mentioning. We have deployed throughout our entire service territory what we call some alternate relay settings that we are able to, with literally a push of a button in our control center, enable under specific conditions. So high fire danger conditions, high wind conditions, where they'll trip instantaneously, essentially, and won't sit and try and reclose during an event. Yes, we'll have more people out of power potentially during an outage if something were to make contact with the line. It might take us a little longer to restore, but it's being another way of being proactive, right? Of de-energizing our system quickly if there was a contact during a high fire weather situation. And then our vegetation management program, all of our lines specifically in the mountains are in some pretty heavily forested areas. And we, have a very strict cycle type approach right now to our vegetation management, but it's another area where we're looking at, artificial intelligence, satellite imagery to help really better spend our dollars in the highest risk areas and making sure that, we can target where the trees really need to be taken out, target those hazard trees that are outside of our right of way and make sure that those are mitigated.
As Pam highlighted for us, there are 4 distinct focus areas for Core Electric's wildfire planning efforts: risk analysis, mitigation, situational awareness, and response. What was interesting to me was to hear how integrated this program is with managing their network. When system decisions, whether it's maintenance, construction programs, or looking at overhead lines that are potential for underground, Core looks at the risk profile and will perform a complete assessment to understand system impacts.
I hope you've enjoyed our conversation this month and will listen in next month as we continue to talk about infrastructure planning, this time turning our attention to large transmission projects.
We're going to hear from industry experts about the need for new transmission development in the country and better understand cost allocation. I hope you'll join us. Bye for now.
CoBank's Power Plays podcast is intended for informational purposes only, and the information should not be used without CoBank's express written permission. The information provided in the podcast is not intended to be investment, tax, or legal advice, and should not be relied upon by listeners for such purposes. The information contained has been compiled from what CoBank regards as reliable resources. However, CoBank does not make any representation or warranty regarding the content and disclaims any responsibility for the information, materials, third-party opinion, and data included in the podcast. In no event will CoBank be liable for any decision made or actions taken by anyone, person or persons, relying on information contained in this podcast.